turn the film to us.
Mhm.
Oh, do you want to?
Oh, yeah, let's get started.
Okay, I'll come back to that.
Well, welcome. Good afternoon. Uh, we're here at the exhibition Americanicity with photographs by John G. Zimmerman at Art Intersection. Linda Zimmerman, John's daughter, has been kind enough to come in from California, where it happens to be pleasantly cool, to someplace where it's pushing 90 degrees. And the air conditioning is running here in April. So we're very lucky and fortunate to have been able to work with the archive that's located in California at Pebble Beach, and to have Linda join us to talk about John, the characteristic of him as a photographer, maybe a little touch on him as a father, maybe, and to take a look at the work that has been transcribed from pages of magazines and periodicals. I'd like to give a little background on Linda so you know a little bit about her. Her family started the archive after John's passing in 2002. So Linda, her two brothers, and her mother still actively work on this archive and license images and do very nice things like make prints available for galleries, brick and mortar galleries like Art Intersection. She has a PhD in art history and humanities, master's in documentary film, and worked with PBS in New York City. So she has a lot of experience in the visual arts. She's also traveled the world. I think it's fair to call you an explorer because some of the stories you've told me about traveling the world and solo sometimes. She lived in West Berlin, back when it was West Berlin. Went to Paris after high school, did graduate work in London. So the perspective of a well-traveled life is always of great value. Welcome, Linda. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you. Thank you for inviting me and for curating this wonderful show.
It is. The work is so great. Before we get started into some of the prepared thoughts that we've had, would you tell us a little bit about John, and then we'll touch more on maybe on his photography and what's on the walls, but a little background as your father and the family.
Sure. So when you're thinking about my father's a photographer, think second half of the 20th century. So he was working from 1950, early 1950 to the 1990s when he retired to Pebble Beach. And he was, within the family, we call him a magazine photographer. The proper term is photojournalist, but his work, whether it was editorial or commercial, was for magazines, for print. And he traveled an awful lot. He worked, we traveled with him sometimes, and my two brothers were assistants for him. So my mother was his agent and manager of the production company. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us after he passed away to think about starting an archive, because we had all lived his career with him, and he left behind such a wealth of material. And just to finish what we were talking about before we started, you know, his film was all scattered in different archives, and when we requested it back, he was purely analog. So this was pre-digital, and we got, you know, so much film, and it was negatives and transparencies. And the negatives, we didn't have a scanner. We had to get a scanner, and we had, I don't know if you knew Rod Dresser from CPA.
Yes.
We had him print out contact sheets of a lot of these assignments that we had never seen, and we were looking at the contact sheets saying, wow, this is incredible stuff. But it was the first time we had seen it, because a lot of it was before our time.
Mm-hmm.
We actually didn't know that he, maybe we knew that he worked for Ebony, but we had never seen the work. And we came across some scrapbooks that my grandmother had kept, and of the assignments. And so we approached Ebony about getting some of that film back, and you see some of those assignments here, like the Matt Ingram is an Ebony assignment.
Well, it sounds like an exciting life. What's interesting, I think, is that you were actually able to experience some of the photography as you grew up and got to see his work. The exhibition at Art Intersection is called Americanicity because it looks at maybe I should say through my eyes, and I hope the visitors that come here look at the work that is from the 50s until the 70s, and then see things that are familiar with what we are doing today. And that's social, cultural, political. There were so many connections in looking at the work. Personally, I love black and white imagery, and the work spoke to me from the just basic composition and quality and technical beauty of the work, but then also other things that are going on today, and that was a connection for me. I'd like to touch on a point that I found interesting as I thought more and more about this, and it may be very obvious, but we have the original three estates that came out of Europe, and it's the realm, the clergy, and the commoners. And in a democratic society, that's the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary branch. But who else affects laws and the construct of our society? And that's the media and the press. And so those three estates actually have a fourth estate. And the media, newspapers and magazines and billboards became such a critical element in communicating and informing the citizenry of what was going on. And they may deliver a message of observation. They may also deliver a message of prediction or a message of something that needs to be taken care of. So that became the fourth estate. And today, we have cable news, we have social media, we have this fifth estate. And there's an interesting quote that I'll just pull a piece of it out. The fifth estate democratized journalism, photojournalism, and now we have the citizen journalist. The fourth estate, the print media and television, is very heavily regulated and observed. But the other side of that, the fifth estate, the citizen journalist, whatever you think, whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, you can say it 24/7 on the internet, whether it's YouTube or a blog. So what we got the opportunity to do in Americanicity is to step back and look at what the communications vehicle was during that time period before this fifth estate came into place. When you were old enough and the magazines, you must have seen the magazines, did you react to, that's my dad's photograph on the cover or on the inside of the magazine?
Yes. But just to go back to what you said, you made some points that are rich and I should address them. So with, how magazines were, they were the currency of the day, and everybody read Time or Life or saw the cover of Sports Illustrated, and those magazines had big budgets, and they would send my father off for weeks at a time to cover something or to try and do a photographic essay. And when he arrived, to photograph an athlete, he could expect absolute gratitude and cooperation in a way that now that there's the fifth estate and everybody's generating their own content, a lot of times they don't want to make time for a photographer for a magazine. And so magazines occupy a different place in the realm now. And so it was different for my father when he made these photographs.
Yeah, it has changed, and we notice that in photography from the mass of images that are photographed today. If you hand a phone to a photographer, they'll take a great photograph. You hand a phone to anybody else, well, we might get a good one every once in a while. So it has really changed the number of images that we get to see or have to see. Linda was just looking around. Behind us is another room with more photographs. There's 58 images in this exhibition. I've had the pleasure last week to see Linda in a Stanford Duke University conversation about John's advertising work. And we get to see some of that style and that connection to the subject, and that passion actually comes through in all of his work. It was a great episode
I'm glad you got that,
conversation.
because that was the point of the talk, is that it exists on a continuum, and it's not like editorial work is over here or photojournalistic work and the commercial work is over there. It's interwoven.
Yeah, and that became clear. So you talk about getting some time with an athlete or a celebrity of some kind, and then today not so much, perhaps because it got so busy or is so busy. John worked in an environment where he was a stranger, and yet the people welcomed him, and that's because they were excited about a story. Is that
Right. He was not showing up unsolicited on doorsteps. You know, this was sometimes he would show up with a writer from the magazine, but they would have been contacted first, and they would have been, the conversations would have happened about what the story was going to be about. So cooperation would have been built over that time.
and you can see it, the
Yeah.
images of Matt Ingram, for example,
Yeah.
and some of the sports celebrities that we have in this exhibition. It was just, you were okay to be, he was okay to be there as a photographer.
And it was also, television was ascendant, but it didn't surpass magazines the way it has. So magazine photographers could get access that is unthinkable today, because television cameras and have the primary place, and just because there are so many more photographers, getting credentials and getting access is a real challenge. Where when my dad was he covered, I think it was maybe 9 or 10 Olympic Games, and he was in Australia in '56 for the Summer Games, and he was one of 2 photographers for Sports Illustrated there, and they really had the run of the field.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite a change till today. One of the things about this exhibition that really was interesting to me when it was black and white, and it presented beautiful images in a time when film was the media and the technical expertise. Now, John also innovated and had cameras built for him, and did innovative work with the cameras, the camera behind the basket, the backboard, sorry, in a basketball game. But you look at these images, and from my personal film experience, my images would be a little blurry and a little noisy, but his are so beautifully done. He was quite a technologist.
Yeah, he liked to have control and liked to control the elements, but he can also, like I'm looking straight across at Will Chamberlain dunking a basket, and Bill Russell is looking up at him, and that's just kind of a Cartier-Bresson moment, right?
Yeah.
So he could do both kinds of photography.
So for everybody that can't attend the exhibition and walk through the space, there is a virtual website that shows like a Google Streets walkthrough, so you could see this image of Wilt Chamberlain, and I would not want to be underneath Wilt when he comes down with that shot. It's just an amazing action. You can feel the energy in that photograph.
That's really a neat feature that you did with this exhibit, and I imagine you did with others, right? So if you can't make it to the exhibit because of COVID challenges or something like that, it'll live on.
Yes. Let me address one thing. So we're vaccinated. We're not using masks today. There's nobody else in the gallery. We're very respectful of precautions. It just happened to be that we feel safe and comfortable in this particular environment.
I'll point out, I actually got vaccinated in Arizona, not California, where I still can't be vaccinated.
It's tough out there, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. It seems to be quite open to be here now that they've lowered the age to
The rollout
16.
is slow, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite good. I'm going to speak to our world famous operator back here, Evan. Are we ready to look at some images? Okay. So some of the images that connected for me in this actually felt to me like create and recreate. What you see is this very large American flag. Linda can speak a little bit to what the flag is in the sense of the scene. What it evoked for me was the patriotic symbol that the flag has been for us for the entire history of the nation. And then in the last um, 5, 6 years, whatever time frame, how the flag can actually be hijacked as a political brand. And I like seeing this flag. I like the flag being neutral, but that really struck a chord with me to see a large flag and really evidence of the patriotic symbol that it is.
And that's actually, that large image is, here's a detail of that same flag. And you can see on the, this is the cover of the book that Alan was referring to, America in Black and White, kind of a play on the format, but also America.
Yeah.
And you can see that the people who are cleaning the flag are American Legion officers, and this was a massive flag. This is in Detroit. It used to hang on the side of the Hudson department store on Flag Day and various American holidays. And both images are in the show.
So it really resonates in a way with how important these patriotic symbols are and how we use them as we navigate through eras and yeah, I'll leave that there. um, Next image, please, Evan. So this is Matt Ingram. He was arrested for staring at a white woman and spent time in jail. And this was part of an article for Ebony magazine.
Right. I had mentioned that my dad, when he was beginning in the early 50s, he was freelancing out of the Time Life Bureau in Atlanta. And he was freelancing for a number of publications. And that was a time when John Johnson, who was the founder of Ebony, was basing Ebony on life, big picture format. And there weren't a lot of African American photographers around at that time. Gordon Parks was one major exception, the brilliant Gordon Parks. But so they hired Life magazine. There was a handful that worked for Life magazine. My dad ended up doing about a dozen assignments, and this was one. Matt Ingram was a sharecropper in North Carolina, and he was arrested, tried, and convicted for what the alleged crime was called reckless eyeballing. So he was staring at a 17-year-old white woman in a way that she found threatening. And so a jury, an all-white jury, of course, found him guilty. But this happened in 1951, and this was the last. Matt Ingram was the last person to be convicted like this. NAACP really pushed back. It got a lot of press from magazines like Ebony, and the verdict was vacated, but his life had been shattered. And so the assignment for John was to go and see how Matt Ingram was trying to put together back his life with his wife and 9 children. And just really poignant, difficult photos. I mean, of course you can't put your life back together. And the article said that a lot of people in the community shunned him. So he had to go elsewhere, and he was never able to get back to where he was.
Next image, please.
But you have a number of images from that story in this show.
Oh, yes. One of the images is 2 of his children on the back of a mule. Again, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is the seeming comfort of him being in the space, and his photographs weren't of people expecting their portrait to be taken. It was of people that were just in their environment, and he was capturing that environment. I found, and we'll see some more images here shortly, but the directness of the subject of the image is very clear, but the subtlety and the nuance of around it. Take this image, for example, and we'll talk a little bit about vaccination because we're in the middle of a vaccinations time in our country. Again, this is polio vaccination. All the polio vaccinations were segregated in the South. This young child in the iron lung with the white doll just kind of illustrates this separation. And I just want to connect the dot that I saw when I was looking at this, and there's more images of these vaccinations in that process, was the segregation of that process, and then today the difficulty in the communities, people of color, with either receiving the vaccine or not trusting the vaccine. And the polio vaccine had a rugged start before they found the formula that actually worked. So it's happened, and then it's happening all over again.
Right. And I will say that with a historical archive like ours, uh, there are these resonances that come up that you don't expect. So we, have had calls for this story that John did for, he was sent into the midst of a massive polio outbreak in the South in 1953. And it was similar to today. It was the vaccine, it was a year or two before the Salk vaccine, which was going to be taking care of it 100%. So the vaccination, the effort was to vaccinate all of the kids in Montgomery, Alabama with something called gamma globulin. And it was like maybe a cocktail that we have that's like not quite the vaccine, but it was supposed to help stave off paralysis, which was the big fear.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of common elements like the fear, the not really knowing what if you get hit with it, what the effect is going to be. So these are fascinating photos because this happened to be for Life magazine. My dad was working for Life and Ebony, and so he photographs very thoroughly both sides of that coin, how both communities came together to get vaccinated. And just really subtle things like you have a picture in the show here of, I think, African American families, and this is in July, so it would have been really, really hot there. They're standing in long, 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 long lines, waiting to get vaccinated. And then there are photographs, not in the show, but I think in the book, of white families who were in auditoriums waiting for their vaccination.
Definitely a difference. Definitely an intentional difference, unfortunately. So the vaccination. Now, there's another book that we have one image from that book, and it's Arthur Ashe when he won the U.S. Open. And you have great stories about this work. There's another book, Crossing the Line. Oop, camera's over there. And it's very interesting what a monumental event this became. And then today, I would have to say I don't see in sports that gap that doesn't exist anymore. But to see this breakthrough with Arthur Ashe in that event, that was a big deal. How many hours did your father spend?
Right. So, when Arthur Ashe progressed round after round at the U.S. Open in 1968, it was the first time that amateurs and professionals were playing together. Arthur Ashe I believe he was a lieutenant at West Point, and he was an amateur, right? But he was doing well in the tennis. He got leave to take part in the tournament, and no one was expecting him to win. So, but he got to the finals, and so Life called my dad at the last minute and said, like, nobody knows who Arthur Ashe is at this point. Cover him, and that meant follow him off and on the court, which was unusual for that time, 1968. So my dad followed him for 36 hours, and knowing my dad, he was very thorough. So he's in the locker room, he's on the subway, he's on the streets of New York. You just get a really good sense of how people respond to Arthur Ashe and what his life was like. I mean, it changed the day he became the first black man to win the US Open, and I think he's still the only black man to have won the US Open. And he went on to this incredible career as a humanitarian and civil rights activist. But those 36 hours, it turns out it was a cover story, but of my father's photographs, maybe 2 or 3 were published. So we had 45 rolls of black and white negative from 68 that had never been published. I looked at that in 2016 and I thought, okay, well, 2018 is the 50th anniversary coming up. We should do something. You kind of have to look ahead when you have a historical archive. So long story short, I had seen a wonderful documentary on Althea Gibson, who is a African-American tennis player who was the first to win the US Open. Um, so I reached out to the filmmaker Rex Miller and I said, how about doing a documentary on Arthur Ashe? And he was open to the idea. He actually made a virtual film, the kind that you put the goggles on, that that was premiered at Sundance, and you could see that at the U.S. Open. He did an exhibition of my father's photographs, incredible outdoor exhibit at the U.S. Open that traveled to the Hall of Fame in Newport. But he's still working on this full-length featured documentary on Arthur Ashe that's going to be out later this year. So that's exciting, and that you'll be able to see some of the photographs. But the book follows the form that my dad, the arc that he followed Ashe, which was 36 hours as his life was changing and he won.
It must be fun, interesting, exciting to see 45 rolls of film turn into a book and then think that it's going to be a feature film, and to see that whole transition, and to see the work it printed. I mean, just that life that gets put back into something that had served its initial purpose and now has this new life again.
Yeah, it is really exciting to see people who like turned on to the work. That is gratifying. And for a lot of this, when we got the film, John was purely analog. So when we got all this film back, we didn't know what it looked like. It took a while for it to emerge. And of all places, a young scholar from Belgium called us and wanted to do a book about my dad's, what evolved into our conversations, and it's always conversations, right? They might want to license a photo, and the next thing you know, they're publishing a book.
Yeah.
But they were very interested in the black and white, this scholarly team from Belgium. And so they proposed doing a book. They got the publisher, the Belgian publisher, and that's really when this came into sharper focus, this exhibit here, where we went through all of the assignments and looked at all of the film. So there's not, in the early days, I was finding, little glycine wrappers marked Beatles, and there'd be like the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan, and it would be on the bottom of a cardboard box. Those days are over because we've gone through everything now, and that was pretty exciting too.
Oh yeah, that had to have been.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So this image really brought a connection, not because this image of itself represents anything that's violent or anything that is negative, except it's a funeral procession, but it really connected to some of the difficulties we're seeing in our society and the protests that have gone on in reaction. So it was a catalyst as opposed to back to this create and recreate. It was just a catalyst of, oh my goodness. We have done an exhibition of Dan Budnick's work and the marches, and in that there are several processions that were part of a protest. And so this image coupled with that image, coupled with what's going on today that we see on the television, really made that era take on another life, perhaps. So it was thought evoking just to see the image.
Yeah, and what can happen with the families of photographers is sometimes we can get too hooked into the original context, and we're thankfully at the point where that's loosening. And so these photos is out there to be put in other contexts that resonate with what's going on today, right? They're not purely
Clearly.
historical.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that's very exciting to us about this show is for you to have put this collection together in a way that resonates so strongly with what's going on in the country today.
And one of the points, and Evan, who you all get to see in a little bit, because he has a question and an image he wants to talk about. we sat down and looked at the work, and I gave him the book, and he selected some of the extra images because there was a different perspective. You know, there's only about 40 years difference between Evan and myself, and you know, having lived through
Only 40.
wow, okay. You know, going through the Vietnam protests and going through, you know, a lot of the agony of the 60s and the 70s and seeing all that, and then to have someone who hasn't been in that exact environment makes similar connections. It means that it's not just context based. It's presenting an idea and a concept because our contexts are completely different.
Yeah. And that's neat when an image can rise above the specifics that it was created from.
Yes. Oh, clearly. And these transcend that storyline, so to speak, that they came from originally. Evan, another one? I love this image. This one's in the exhibition. This is John. I'll let Linda explain it. It's I could go on and on about this
Oh,
because.
say something about it first.
Pardon me?
I said say something about it before I did.
Well, sometimes it's the environment that you're in, and you know, I'm at dinner with a friend who leans in a direction that may not be my direction, but I don't want to alienate the conversation, so I'll get involved in it. So I've got this kind of two-faced conversation. Not, I don't know how I recover from that two-faced comment, but you know, you tend to have conversations with different people at different times, and I just connected with this personally.
So this is, we're calling it a self-portrait, but it's not. It was actually like many times when my dad appears, it's a test shot for an assignment for a story that he was given. And here it was, Life magazine wanted him to do a photo essay on political cliches. And this one happens to be like the Janus-faced politician, right? And he's got the peace sign and then the clenched fist. So there were cliches like spiraling inflation, ducking the issue, hawk or the dove, right?
And those are online, and I've seen those. They're great.
Yeah. And so what he did is he loved to innovate, and he had specialty cameras that he worked with, one being a pan-in panoramic camera and another being a strip camera. And he would adapt them from maybe initial uses, like they would be used, the strip camera, at the finish of a horse race or something. But he would use them for expressive photographs. So maybe we can go to the next one.
Yeah.
This is one of the political cliches, the hawk or the dove, that was the test shot for. And you know, the test shot, it just shows he was, you know, the Time Life building is right near Radio City Music Hall, and so he'd go out onto the street and just, you could see his exuberance when he was doing that. He just loved making photographs. He loved this political cliche series. There were maybe about a dozen political cliches, and Life didn't publish it. And so he ended up making, and he didn't usually go to this lengths, but he made a big spiral bound presentation, and he sent it out to photo editors that he knew. And it just never got one. He sent it to Mark Kaufman at Playboy at one point. Mark Kaufman was originally just with him at Sports Illustrated and a classmate in high school of his. And Mark said, "Hey, sorry, John, I couldn't get anyone interested," you know. And so that they still are awaiting publication, and you know, we probably will at some point.
Super. It definitely shows some playfulness, I think, in his approach to an assignment. This is interesting to me for a couple reasons, and there's a couple images here. The closeness of the photographer to the president, and the location that they're at, and some of us who are camera nerds happen to have counted that he's got 4 cameras around his neck. But it's it's besides that, he's there being the absolute perfect photographer and probably building his relationship with the president as he's walking.
Yeah, so this was, he left Sports Illustrated in 62, at the end of 62, because he felt like he'd gone as far as he could with sports and he didn't like to repeat himself. So he joined the staff of the Saturday Evening Post, another big picture format magazine. And there was a story, a cover story on Richard Nixon going behind the Iron Curtain and taking a tour of those countries. And that's a production still from that tour in 1963. And uh, he got along with people. We have thank you notes from both Richard Nixon and his wife Patricia in our archive, thanking
Mhm.
him for just being a delight on that tour. And they love the pictures. And in fact, when their daughter Tricia got married, Life magazine covered that, and they asked for my father to be the photographer.
Wow. Oh, that's quite an acknowledgement. Quite an acknowledgement. The next picture is Julie Nixon. Um, this is one of the walls that came down. Um there's quite a presentation I saw some years ago about the various walls that we've built around the world between Israel and Northern Ireland and Berlin. And because it's the president's daughter, it just again resonated with current um, discussions, arguments, turmoil, however you want to couch the building of our southern wall. So this was interesting.
And probably has some resonance for your residents here in Arizona.
Yes, absolutely. And we're all over the map in this conversation between like it, don't like it, right, wrong, however you want to start the conversation. You made a comment earlier about this image that your father was covering this trip, and yet what was interesting was this kind of sidebar of the president's daughter kind of trying to look over the wall or through the wall
Right.
as kind of a context building to the story.
Right, but you don't know where the story is going to emerge. And I know he always cited his training in high school as an important factor in his photography. And that's because this cinematographer, Clarence Bach, had a vocational program in this high school where my dad went. It was 4 years. And he would do things like he treated it like a newsroom. He would send them out on assignments. And if he were going to send my dad out, let's say to cover a baseball game, he'd say, don't cover the action, cover something else,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the story is not the obvious story. And I think that was a lesson my dad learned well, because sometimes there's a lot going on with crowd reactions, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
the action uh, that's the main event.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Next one, Evan. Um, this also struck, we have a number of points, I think, in our legislative system, in just what's been in the headlines for so long about the diversity in our government and are we truly representative of the country. And so this just struck a chord of, and I have to say, I am in this audience these days of being an old white guy with gray hair. The diversity has changed. I'm afraid we've we've probably cracked some glass ceilings. I'm not sure we've broken enough of them wide open, but just rang that bell for me of how many times we look at a scene like this and realize that we really aren't covering all of the opinions and concepts and concerns or representation of our nation, and that was what rang for me here. So this is the Capitol building,
Mhm.
and your father covered Washington D.C. for some time.
That was his first job, was for Time Inc. Based in Washington, and it was the political beat. And his first day on the job, it's a famous story. He was leaving the White House with a group of photojournalists, and they heard shots ring
That
out.
was his first day on
Yeah.
this job? I'm sorry, tell the story. It's amazing.
Okay. They heard shots ring out in Blair House,
Oh,
and
hold on a second. We have a train going by. It's going to take a second. Can you hear the train? Yeah, great.
I can see it going by.
Okay, it's probably quiet now.
Um, so where was it?
Oh, first day,
Lost my-
shots rang out.
Oh, okay. So the shots rang out, and the shots rang out at Blair House, where President Truman was staying while the White House was being renovated. And the photographers had put their cameras in the trunk, but my dad has his around his neck. So he was the first on the scene, and he got some photographs of what happened was two Puerto Rican nationalists were trying to assassinate the president, and they ended up killing a White House guard. And they were apprehended, but as this was all unfolding, so my dad's photos made time and life, and it was just like he happened to be on the scene. But that was his first day on the job.
So you got home, and how was your first day today?
So with this one, when you chose this image, we were looking at this, my brothers and I, and we were talking about it, and it resonated for us that, under President Trump and the pictures that we would see often of his cabinet meetings, there was this makeup and there wasn't a lot of diversity, so that resonated for us.
Yeah, it's kind of what resonated for me. And unfortunately, this has been true for 70 years. It's maybe we'll see a change in this, and I think we see change. It's that not quite enough yet. Next image, please.
Oh, here's an example I put in of change. So this is, the photo on the left of the congressman is an impromptu shot, but then it probably registered with my dad. And when he was given the opportunity or the assignment for life to do a portrait of Ralph Nader and Nader's Raiders, they were called, he chose the same backdrop. And you were going to explain who Nader's Raiders are for the people who don't know.
Well, I haven't researched this, but I just remember the safety regulations and the insistence by Ralph Nader on setting standards and removing products that were detrimental and not good for the safety of people. The Corvair came to mind, Pinto came to mind with you. The old joke was some years ago, the beginning of a bad day is when Mike Wallace is on your doorstep with a camera crew. Well, for the corporate people, I think if somebody was to call into the chairman of the board and say Ralph Nader's on the phone, that would strike fear into their hearts, because he had a strong leadership and these people followed him because he was leading a challenge that really was unmade until he came along. So.
And
Very
there's
powerful.
diversity, so it comes in fits and starts. But his volunteers and the activists and the staffers were women, just a variety of people you see there behind him.
Yes, yes. All right. So Evan, your photograph, your question.
Hello. So this is my favorite image in the exhibition. I'm sorry, I'm just making sure my sound is okay. Okay. And this sort of is the one that most resonated with me, and something I've been wondering about is we've sort of seen through all of the pictures we've been looking at tonight how John was so comfortable in so many different situations and welcome in so many different situations by so many different people. And I wanted to maybe talk about some of the situations where he wasn't as welcome as others, and how he approached making pictures in tough situations or tense situations, and how he thought about those times.
That's a great question, because here it is the one image that's different in this exhibition. He seems to be provoking them almost, right? Provoking a reaction out of them, and in doing so, revealing the character of that board of elderly white males. And I think in the way back at the left, there is a older woman who may be the widow of a recently deceased board member, right? Because those boards were all men. And now there are actually some conditions or requirements that they be more balanced. But I know that, my dad had the luxury of spending time with his subjects, and that creates trust in a way that nowadays a photographer working for a magazine is given very little time. And so, and if an athlete is a mega athlete and they're surrounded by an entourage, they're not going to get that same kind of cooperation or trust. So I think my dad was operating under ideal conditions a lot of times, because the magazine photographer was welcomed, and the press was, the magazine publicity was by and large very flattering, and so there was not a reason he was not in a lot of antagonistic situations in the way you see it today.
But that the look on that chairman's face is, it's time for you to leave. It's-
Although my dad did know that man. His name is Clay Blair. This is the board meeting for Curtis Publishing, which published the Saturday Evening Post. And he worked at Sports Illustrated, and he knew my dad, and kind of lured my dad from Sports Illustrated to the Post. So it's kind of like a little bit, I think a little bit kind of tongue in cheek instead of true hostility, like we're going to bust your cameras.
Well, I think we've gone through the images we prepared for tonight's conversation. I would like to close with one statement, and we talked about this just a little bit before we got started today. Did you have extreme or little, and how did that change over your life to see your dad's images in the magazine? I mean, that had to have some effect, excitement, or like, oh, that's just dad. How did that go for you?
No, we were children of our time. So the magazine's coming out every week. It was exciting to see. We didn't always know if it was going to be a cover or how big the story was going to be. But we were very proud of my dad, and he was kind of like a Superman figure for us. He
Cool.
just would go off all over the world. There's no assignment that he didn't do. He did just all kinds of assignments for the magazine. So it was really fun, and we would go with him sometimes. And this will just show you like what kind of access it was. So it was in the 70s, and I'm not a big baseball fan, but it was like the Dodgers and the Yankees were constantly duking it out in the World Series. And so my brothers and I went, and we were on the field with balls for the players to sign, and we could go up to Reggie Jackson, or we could go up to Ron Guidry, or any of these players, and in a way that's unthinkable now, and you don't really give it much thought at the time, but it's like, wow, that was pretty neat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Evan, do we have any comments or questions from anybody?
We do not.
Oh, it's a quiet group. Okay.
Indeed.
Well, I think I've gone through the questions that I had for the time we have. We could talk for hours, at least I feel that we could. Is there something that would wrap up this conversation?
Well, I
you'd
just
like
want to say
bring?
one thing that we're still going to do before the exhibition closes. It's an incredible exhibition space you have here. This is not even the only space, right? You have another gallery.
Yes.
But our collection is analog. We've made digital prints here, and you suggested in your state-of-the-art printing facility that you are going to work with us to make a silver gelatin print
Yes.
and I'm not quite clear like how that's like what the process is, but could you just tell us a little
Oh,
bit?
sure. So these images are scanned and printed digitally and beautifully. There's an attraction to the analog process that was the process that developed the film and would have made any prints back in the days of the magazine work. So we have a full chemical lab, dark room in the back, and we'd like to explore some of the negatives that are special and to create silver prints for the nostalgia of the fact that when these images were made, that was the medium that you would use.
But you're going to have to make a digital negative, or it's just
No,
it's all going to be,
straight from the negatives.
okay.
We could make digital negatives. We could actually pick some images that might print beautifully in platinum. And other collections have chosen to do some silver prints when they can, because it brings a nuance and it brings an aesthetic to an image that was originally in that era.
So that's really exciting to us because we haven't had an opportunity to do that. And, you know, we do have a lot of work prints in our collection. So when the editors were thinking choosing which photos they were going to run, they would like print out work prints in
Yeah.
the time ink lab, and then they might focus on exposures for a particular one. But that's as far as we have. We don't have like what you think of as fine art.
Well,
Silver
I
gelatin.
think these, given the condition of these prints, the negatives ought to be beautiful to print from.
That's exciting.
So it would be a lot of fun
All
to
right.
actually create that era-specific print.
Great.
Well, thank you everybody who's joined us. Linda, thank you.
Thank you.
We're out here just to sit down in the gallery with your father's work and talk about it.
It's a treat. Thanks.
Very much. I'm looking at you, Evan. Down?